I'm Keith Grachow, co-creator of Reponaut, and this is the True North Country Comics podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics podcast, dedicated to celebrate Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. On this episode, I chat with Keith Grachow about his comic book series, Reponaut. Please like and subscribe to this website by hitting the subscribe button, so be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. Toronto Comicon is a spectacular 3-day sci-fi, horror, anime, and gaming event in Canada that attracts thousands of people to come to the Metro Toronto Convention Centre in Toronto, Ontario, taking place from March 20th to 22nd. Every year, Toronto Comicon offers exciting family-friendly attractions, events, world-renowned celebrities, and a variety of comic creators including Keith Grachow. Based in Ontario, Keith Grachow is a comic book author, illustrator, graphic designer, and instructor who teaches workshops on illustration. Keith has written for SCI for Comics, co-written a story in Cauldron, authored his own comics, Yost the Golem, Bounty Hunter Kai, and co-created many comic books and anthology stories. Strange Case with Mark Bertolini for Scout Comics, Checkmate Blues with Robert Iveniuk, and Toronto Comics Anthology, 3 Snowblind with Howard Wong, and children's books with his mother, Amy, Up in the Sky series. He has also worked in animation, as a digital ink and paint artist for the Disney movies Winnie the Pooh and Princess and the Frog, and designed toy packages for products like Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon and Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Currently, Keith is co-authoring and illustrating the graphic novel Summer on the Swing with his mother, Amy Grachow. The semi-autobiographical comic tells the story of her upbringing in a bungalow colony in upstate New York in the 1960s. Keith's newest project is Reponaut. Reponaut is a new comic book miniseries co-created by Keith and Howard Wong that tells a tale of a family drama set in space with lots of humor, horror, and action. The family is led by Renix, a father struggling to keep his life on track, who finally gets the big repo job that could be a new start. So, without further ado, here's my chat with Keith Grachow about his comic book series, Reponaut. So, Keith Grachow, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
I appreciate your time. I know you're a busy fellow, but before I get to all the questions, I would like to know, what are you reading today? What are you finding time to read in your spare time?
So I just picked up Don Winslow's book. He's a prolific American author, writes a lot of crime, noir type things. He just had a movie come out based off of one of his books called Crime 101. I've been reading his book so far, The Final Score. It's like a anthology, short stories. So far, it's pretty riveting. I am also comic book wise. I'm rereading Amazing Spider-Man from issue number 1. I've got the Essentials books, so I'm going to go and read through all those. And I'm almost done collecting my back issues of Amazing Spider-Man as well. So I'll be able to read at least a good run of about 600 books.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's going to take me a while to do it, but it's fun to look for the books. And then when you finally get that good run of books, you can go and read them or reread them. And I like seeing the evolution of like where the character started and seeing how the art and the story kind of become more sophisticated. And so it's pretty fun to do that.
Sure. Lots of good classic stuff and lots of good classic art there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we're here talking, you got a new project. I noticed you announced that on Instagram called Reponaut. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. Well, what is the story all about?
So Reponaut is an absurdist sci-fi horror miniseries that takes place starting on this ship called Hawker 8. And this Reponaut named Renix is just down on his luck, trying to get the next repo score. His ship is basically fallen apart. He owes a lot of credits. and he can't pay for half the things the ship requires, like very basic things. So he's just looking for the next score when it drops into his lap. And he goes on this adventure to get this score. We're seeing in book one, the beginning of that. Hopefully we'll have the following book in your hands as well soon. But right now, book one is going to be out, hopefully by Toronto Comicon. And it's a 48-page, I would say, mini graphic novel, I guess, or big comic book, whatever you want to, giant size comic. And it's co-created by me and Howard Wong. Howard, he's probably been on your show. He is a writer for like Image and Marvel, and we've collaborated on other stories prior to this one. So we've been working together for almost 20 years at this point. And the way we created this book, essentially, I was drawing a sketch from a lesson I'd been teaching one of my students. I would share my screen. I draw digitally. So he wanted to write stories, this young guy, and I would doodle something for him and he'd come up with a story. And so I was finishing up this astronaut character, I guess, from one of the stories that we had been playing around with between my student and myself. And then Howard and I were going to get on a meeting right after the lesson ended to talk about the future of what we're going to do. We've got a couple of things in the fire right now, but we're trying to figure out, like, do we go and revisit an older story we'd been working on that never saw the light of day, or do we focus on something else? Anyway, I'm drawing this thing and I'm like, hey, do you mind if I share my screen while we're talking? Because, that way I'm not like rudely looking down the whole time, right? It's a video that we're having this conversation. And so Howard's watching me draw this and he's like, what is this character? I'm like, I don't know. I have no idea what this is. What do you think it is? And then he came up with this really interesting story of, could be like this repo type guy in space collecting junk or trying to get recovered, somebody who owes something and they have to recover it from that person, like whatever that may be. And so we started coming up with riffing this idea. And when we were like, well, what are we going to do with this? We just decided to keep on making this a very organic process. So we set up a Google Drive file and started putting all of our ideas down. And Howard was like having some difficulty figuring out like the plot of the story. And I said, well, why don't we just keep on doing what we started, which is just going and doing this organic back and forth. And so I started contributing ideas into the story on this drive. And before you know it, we had this big epic story that really was like just feeding off of each other's ideas. And then we're like, well, where do we go from here? How do we keep on keeping this organic energy, this jazz-like, very spontaneous storytelling going? I wasn't sure. I mean, really, at the end of the day, we had never attempted anything like this before. So Howard was like, well, why don't you just draw what you think you can draw with this, and then we'll go from there. So I started figuring out what the characters looked like, sending him to Howard, and Howard would give suggestions. And then from there, I started building out like thumbnails, and then I would add what I thought was happening on each page into the script as I was working on these thumbnails. And then Howard and I kind of talked about that more. And eventually we decided that to keep this going to the very end, Howard wouldn't come up with a definitive script. We would just base the story off of my thumbnails, which he would then, once we decided that the story was solid enough, I would start to draw more finished pages. And then instead of having any kind of dialogue prior to the finished pages, I just had to make sure I kind of had an idea of what was going to be said on each page. And so I put my ideas of dialogue in the script, and Howard would go over those and then figure out what he would want to say. And eventually what we ended up having was finished pages, and he was sent those pages and started working on dialogue from there. So then we shared our screen again, and we went over the finished page with dialogue and make tweaks. So this is like happening to the very end of the process, even up to the book cover was, if anybody's seen it out there on my socials, it's this character named Renix who's like hooked up to these machines, and all of a sudden this creatures kind of crawling towards him. And that was actually one of the pages that I had made interior wise. And we were trying to figure out what a good cover would be. And I had some ideas, but nothing concrete. This is, again, at the very end of the process. Usually I figure out what the cover is pretty early on, but this time I didn't really know. And so Howard, we're going through all these pages of art, and he's like, that could be a cover. And I'm like, oh my God, yeah, you're right. And right then and there, sharing the screen with him, I started working on the cover, grabbing that original page and just tweaking it to make it more cover ready. And then from there, I done like a book title for Reponaut, but I changed that. I rearranged it to fit with the cover, all this in front of Howard. So from the beginning of the process, this has been a real organic, shared process that neither one of us has ever tried before. And I'm very proud of how it turned out. I just think that it really brought out the best in both of us. And whether or not the story resonates with people, I can say that from where we started 2 years ago, this started 2 years ago, to now, it's a success because we really didn't know what we were doing and we were trying things, and some of it was failing, some of it was succeeding. But that, I think, is like when you can get the best out of yourself. It's scary, but that's when you know it's really probably a good idea to do it.
That's cool. That's cool. Thank you for sharing that. It's nice to hear the behind the scenes of how things come together. And I'm really glad that it worked out for you. That's for sure. You mentioned that this all started off with a sketch you were doing part of a lecture or teaching session. In conjunction, you also have a YouTube series, which is all about that, called The Imagination Factory. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for mentioning it. So I work with a bunch of different writers, and one of the writers I've worked with in the past, Sarah Furlong, she and I have very kindred type of spirit when it comes to creativity, similar to what Howard and I have, which is that we'll start talking about ideas and then we just kind of like go back and forth and bounce, create this thing and that didn't exist a moment ago. And we've done that a couple of times with stories that she's written where she's super open to input and okay with like making changes. She has really just no ego when it comes to like participation and coming from her, which is just, it's really, really great. I'm always a little bit not weary, but maybe like, I don't want to like, if some writers put so much work into what they've created, I don't want to be like, well, I'm going to change everything that you just did because I understand they've put so much work into it. But Sarah, she's very open to that kind of input. So we've worked on a couple of different projects in the past, Christian County being one of the more recent ones, which I'll have at my table at Toronto Comicon. And so because we worked really well together and we were trying to figure out really how we can raise more funds to keep going with our book, Christian County, which just a quick little pitch is all the things that get lost under your couch coming to life, right? It's a fun little, it's a humor comic for all ages. There's more to it. And we're like, well, we need to figure out how to finance this thing. And so that's where we started talking about, well, maybe if we do like some kind of like a video series where we can do what we do when we're coming up with ideas, but we just present it like in front of a live audience, so to speak. And that's where Imagination Factory started. She had actually already had the name for something else she was going to do, but she's like, this would be great for what we were thinking of. And it is, it's really a perfect idea of just taking a seed of an idea. Like, let's say when we first started recording before we went live, but just to test everything out, essentially Sarah presents an idea to me and I'll think about it and we talk it through going, well, can this work? How can I create this while we're live? And how can she help add to it while we're live and all that kind of stuff? We're trying to figure it out. Then we will figure that one idea out and then progress to the next step. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a comic book, but that's what we're starting off with, comic books. But it could be like a children's book, I guess. It could be like a prose book with illustrations in the future. So right now, season 1 started off as a comic and it's going to be called The Door. And it's about this person who moves into this place and there's a door there and they have no idea how the door got there because the landlord isn't saying there's a door, that like nobody can figure out what this person's talking about. And we started off with this idea, the suggestion that Sarah had given me when we were recording, the next episode would be to like flesh out the character. And again, it's recorded. So everything we're doing is being recorded with the exception of some of the writing, but for the most part, all the art is being recorded. And so you're watching me figure out in real time what's the next step for creating this. And so right now, we just released episode 5, which is dealing with thumbnails, which for anybody that isn't familiar with the comic book process, or not necessarily even comic books, it could be storyboarding or children's books. It's a little drawing that shows what the page is going to look like. And it's done very quickly. And it's supposed to be loose and just with lots of energy. And so as we're working on this, we had talks previously about how we're going to pace out the episodes. But because this is such an organic process, we realized, well, if something needs to be slowed down because hopefully the audience is wanting to see how this is created, then we'll slow it down and we'll create more episodes than we had planned on that subject. So we were thinking the thumbnail was going to be like maybe it's only a 30-minute episode. And then there's another 30 minutes for members. So it's an hour long for each part that we're working on. And the 30 minutes, that's for the members. It's really just extra stuff. So you can watch it without having to be a member, but it's a complimentary if you become a member. And that's on our YouTube channel, The Imagination Factory. When you go to the link, Ko-Fi link, you can become a member for that. But we thought the thumbnail was going to be like maybe 1 episode, maybe 2. Well, it looks like it's going to be much longer, right? So that's kind of how we're working this out. And episode 5 was the first live one we did. So now we have people who are asking questions in real time. And so we have to figure that out too, which is like, I'm drawing, Sarah's talking, answering questions. And how do we do that so that it's not interfering with what I'm drawing? It's been a lot of fun so far. It's what I really love doing, which is just being creative and working with somebody who's also very creative and coming up with something that is more than the two of us, like the sum of the parts. It really did kind of stem from me working with this kid who would ask me to like come up with some drawing, and then they would riff off that drawing with some kind of story. So it really has been full circle when it comes to the connective tissue between Imagination Factory and Reponaut and the way I teach and all of the things I'm working on now, the creative energy that I'm trying to create with all the projects that I'm on.
It's just fascinating to see behind the scenes. The Imagination Factory, I subscribe to your series, and I think everyone should who's interested in how comic books are made or just wanted to see what's going on. It's fascinating to see your thoughts come together and create something in real time. You've done so many instructional classes. I've seen you at different festivals and events do that. If you could pass along one tip to new creators about making a comic book or a graphic novel, what would be one thing you'd say to them?
Doodle. And I think this is my answer that I've given to you every time you've asked a similar question, which is, how do you start these things? How do you get inspiration? And doodling is just this way for you to unlock your imagination without feeling the pressure of having to create something finished, right? It's a great way to create characters because when you're in doodle mode, you're kind of letting your hand and eye just mindlessly go across the paper with this whatever pencil or pen you're using. And it's a light drawing. So you're just filling the paper up until you get something. The paper feels like there's really no more pencil or pen you want to put on it. And then you just look at the paper and you turn it around, you look in the mirror, see the reflection, see if you can see something in it, see if you can see a pattern or some really interesting shapes, or like even sometimes you see faces or you see an actual composition. And by doing this, you're unlocking your imagination so that it's almost like it becomes a reference for whatever it is that you're seeing. So let's say you see a face in there and you go, oh, I've never drawn a raccoon before, but look, that looks like a raccoon. Well, let's see if I can take this doodle I did and continue to develop this raccoon character, which I've never drawn a raccoon before. So now you have a reference for something that you may have never drawn before, and you can just keep building off of that. I'm actually going to be, to your point of doing workshops and panels at different shows, I'm going to be part of YetiCon as a guest. It's a 3-day show in Collingwood and Blue Mountains in Ontario. And I've never done this show before. There's new organizers that are super excited about building from what I guess they've been working on for the last decade and making this really epic show. So I'm going to be doing a doodling workshop as well as a single page comic book workshop. And it is 19th, 20th, and 21st of June.
And I guess one sort of addendum to that is to make sure your doodling happens, always have a pen or a pencil and a notepad with you at all times, I presume, no matter where you are.
Yeah, it could be any paper. It could be like a receipt. It could be just grab paper from like printing paper. It doesn't have to be from a notebook. It could be just anything that you have around. And people do that anyway. Like a lot of people will be on their phone and they'll just start like doodling out flowers. That's what I did, right? Just I would doodle things while I'm talking to somebody. And you're not thinking about really what you're drawing. You've seen these things before, right? Oftentimes you've seen, like I said, a raccoon, but you may never have drawn it. But now you're accessing whatever reference library you have in your head, and it's coming down on this paper. And it's a really kind of magical thing because it's like something that didn't exist a moment ago. And then you build upon it. And that's kind of, again, the theme of taking that and building something from that thing that didn't exist before and making it into a finished product. And it's always the thing that I think a lot of people are intimidated by getting to that finished product because they think you have to have some kind of like supreme talent to do it. And talent has such a little part of it. It's really learning the skills to go from A to B to C to Z that gets you to that finished product. And so once you kind of show that to people that they can do that themselves, then it's not so mysterious. And then we can get more people who can create illustrations or create comics or some kind of visual medium that is handmade. It's drawn from the human person, the spirit of us.
Right. Your books will be at your table, Toronto Comicon. What's the most important thing that you're looking forward to at that event?
It's just having good conversations with people that either I haven't seen since last year, because I've been pretty much just in my cave for the last few months. So I haven't really seen or talked to too many people in the last 3 or 4 months since the con season ended last year. That to me is like the exciting part, is to find out what's been going on with other people, what new projects they're working on or what's going on in their life, and just sharing the things they're going to be doing for the rest of the year. That to me, I think, is the most exciting part.
With everything that you have going on in terms of events and conventions and teaching sessions and books, where do you recommend that people go online to find out more about you?
I'm pretty active on my socials, which is Facebook and Instagram, which is just my name. It's Keith Grachow. I also have a website, kgrachow.com. You can find me there. I have links on my Instagram and Facebook if it makes it easier for you to figure out where to go. And then I've got my YouTube channels. I have another podcast called My Sketchy Goodness, which is under the Wednesday Night Reviews YouTube channel. It's Conrad who runs the Wednesday Night Reviews, and he and I have a show together that we just actually had another episode that featured Howard. And that show is in some way very similar to The Imagination Factory with Sarah and Keith, which is My Sketchy Goodness. I'll just doodle something live while Conrad and I chat about comics or whatever's on our minds. And people can come and ask questions about whatever we're talking about, or they can ask questions about whatever I'm drawing.
Thanks to Keith for the chat. You can discover more about Keith Grachow online at kgrachow.com and on Instagram at Keith_Grachow. And thank you for tuning in to the True North Country Comics podcast. I invite you to visit the True North Country Comics website to listen to even more conversations with creators about making comic books and graphic novels. Also encourage you to subscribe via the website so be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can follow along True North Country Comics on most social media platforms, and you're encouraged to send any and all feedback to John at truenorthcountrycomics.com. Thanks for tuning in, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2026.